He had always cared about his town. Growing up, he remembered the streets, the parks, the small shops, and the neighbors who always looked out for one another. He had never thought much about politics, not really, until one day he realized that the town needed change. Small issues had piled up, streets needing repair, parks in bad shape, community programs that had been ignored. He felt like someone had to step up, and for the first time in his life, he considered running for a seat on the local council. The decision wasn't easy. He spent nights thinking it over, weighing the pros and cons, imagining the long hours of meetings and the constant scrutiny. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't sit back and complain while doing nothing. So he began planning. He started by writing down his ideas for the town, fixing potholes, improving streetlights, supporting small businesses, and creating safe spaces for children to play. It was simple, but it mattered. Next came the campaign. He knew that to reach the voters, he needed visibility. He painted his own campaign signs, each one carefully lettered with his name and a short slogan that reflected his goals. He wasn't a professional, but he poured his heart into each sign. Every stroke of paint represented his commitment, every color a symbol of hope for a better community. Once the signs were ready, he drove to various parts of town to place them in yards, on fences, and at intersections. For days, everything seemed fine. The signs stood tall, visible to anyone passing by. He would often drive through the neighborhoods, checking to make sure they hadn't been knocked over or damaged. Seeing his signs in place gave him a small sense of pride. He knew that people were noticing, and he hoped it would make them think about the changes he wanted to bring. Then one morning, something caught his attention. A sign that had been perfectly upright the day before now lay in pieces on the ground. The stake was bent and the cardboard had tears across it. At first he thought maybe the wind had done it, but when he checked other locations, he saw the same thing. Signs had been ripped out, bent, and thrown aside. It was clear now that someone had done this on purpose. He felt a wave of frustration. He couldn't understand why anyone would go to such lengths just to stop a man from sharing his ideas. He thought about the neighbors, the people who had always been supportive, and he felt disappointed. But he also knew he couldn't give up. He collected the damaged signs, carefully storing them in his garage. Then he made a decision. He would replace them stronger this time and keep moving forward. As he went about replacing the signs, he asked neighbors if they had seen anything unusual. Most shook their heads, but one neighbor hesitantly mentioned seeing a woman, often outspoken in local issues, walking the streets late at night near his signs. She had a reputation for arguing and confronting anyone who disagreed with her. The man tried not to let it bother him. He didn't want to start a personal conflict, but now he at least had a possible lead on who was behind the vandalism. He considered confronting her, but he decided against it. His goal wasn't to escalate tensions. It was to share his message and encourage positive change. Instead, he took a more cautious approach. He replaced his signs with sturdier stakes and reinforced the corners with extra tape. He wanted to ensure they would last even if someone tried to tear them down again. Despite the careful preparations, he still felt uneasy. Each morning, he would drive past his signs, hoping they were still standing. The thought of someone intentionally working against him didn't sit well, but he reminded himself to focus on the bigger picture. He had started this journey to help the town, not to get caught up in petty battles. One evening, as he drove past the neighborhood park, he noticed a movement near one of his signs. A shadowy figure was leaning over it, hands busy with something. His heart raced. He slowed down but stayed inside the car, watching quietly. The figure moved quickly, pulling the sign out of the ground. He couldn't see clearly in the dim light, but it was enough to confirm his fears. Someone was deliberately destroying his signs. He felt a mix of anger and disbelief. Who would do this and why? He wanted to shout, to confront the person, but he knew that acting impulsively could make things worse. Instead, he decided he needed evidence. He thought about installing a small camera, one that could capture movement at night without being obvious. This way, if someone came back, he could identify them without a direct confrontation. He spent the next day setting up the camera. It was small, discreet, and aimed at one of the areas where he had noticed repeated damage. He felt a little silly, like he was preparing for something out of a spy movie, but he also felt a sense of relief. At least now he had a way to document the problem, to protect his signs, and perhaps even prevent future incidents. While preparing, he reflected on why this mattered so much to him. The campaign was about more than signs. It was about being part of the community and working for change. Every sign represented his commitment to the town, and seeing them destroyed felt like an attack on that vision. But he knew he couldn't let one person's actions stop him. The days passed slowly. Each evening he would check the camera footage. The first night showed nothing unusual. He started to worry that maybe the signs would continue to be vandalized without any way to catch the culprit. But he didn't give up. He reminded himself that patience was key, and that the truth often comes out if one waits and observes carefully. One night, around 10 o'clock, he heard a faint noise outside. He looked at the monitor and saw a figure approaching one of his signs. The person moved cautiously, glancing around, and then began pulling the sign from the ground. He watched closely, heart pounding. The figure didn't notice the small camera perched nearby, quietly recording every move. The hands tugged at the stake, ripped the sign from its place, and stuffed it into a bag. The man leaned forward, realizing he now had clear proof of who had been causing all the damage. It was a woman he recognized, someone who had lived in the town for years and had a strong voice in local discussions. She had always been vocal about her opinions, but he never imagined she would take such direct action to oppose him. He felt a strange mix of disappointment and sadness. How had it come to this? Why would someone go so far just to make a point? He decided not to confront her immediately. He wanted to handle the situation the right way. He knew that acting out of anger could make things worse, and he needed to think carefully about his next steps. He took the footage inside and copied it to his computer. It was clear, undeniable evidence of intentional vandalism. The man reached out to the local police the next day. He explained the situation calmly, showing them the footage and describing the repeated incidents. The officers listened, nodding as he spoke. They explained that tampering with campaign signs was against the law, and that now with the video evidence they could take action. The man felt a small sense of relief. Justice might take time, but at least he was no longer powerless. While waiting for the authorities to respond, he continued his campaign work. He spoke with neighbors, attended small town meetings, and continued to replace signs as needed. Each day he reminded himself of the bigger goal: improving the town and serving the people. He refused to let one person's actions derail his efforts, but the situation weighed on him. He couldn't ignore the tension in the air. Some neighbors had noticed the signs being torn down and started gossiping. Opinions divided quietly in the community. Some people sympathized with him, while others seemed to quietly support the woman's actions. He tried to ignore the whispers and focus on the work that mattered most. The camera continued to record nightly. Each morning he would check for any new incidents, always hoping for the best but preparing for the worst. He felt a sense of responsibility, not just for his campaign but for the town. He wanted to show that integrity, patience, and careful planning could overcome conflict. One evening he sat in his living room, reviewing the footage once more. He saw the woman again, moving deliberately but unaware of being recorded. The proof was undeniable. He knew he had to follow the law and let the authorities handle it. He felt a strange mix of satisfaction and nervousness. He had caught her in the act, but he didn't yet know what would happen next. As he looked at the footage, he thought about the irony of the situation. She had taken matters into her own hands, convinced she was doing the right thing. But in doing so, she had exposed herself. He realized that sometimes, actions driven by emotion rather than reason lead to consequences one cannot predict. That night, he went to bed feeling cautious but determined. He knew the coming days would test his patience and resilience, but he was ready. He reminded himself that he wasn't just fighting for a seat on the council. He was fighting for fairness, justice, and the values that he believed should guide the town. In the quiet hours, he imagined what would happen when the truth came out. He hoped the woman would understand the consequences of her actions, and he hoped the town would learn a lesson about patience, respect, and the importance of following the law. Above all, he wanted to continue his campaign without fear, committed to making a positive change for everyone. The signs remained a symbol, not just of his campaign, but of the larger struggle between integrity and impulsiveness, between calm reasoning and reckless action. And the next few days passed slowly. The man continued checking his signs every morning, but now he felt a mix of anxiety and determination. He knew the woman had been caught on camera, yet he didn't want to assume she would stop her actions. It was clear she was determined. perhaps thinking she was protecting the town or simply opposing him. But he knew that patience and the law would be stronger than anger and recklessness. He spent extra time talking to neighbors, explaining his plans for the town in a calm and friendly way. People began to notice his dedication. While some were curious about the tension with the woman, most were impressed that he was focused on the campaign rather than chasing personal revenge. He felt a small sense of satisfaction, knowing that integrity often spoke louder than words. Meanwhile, the woman had no idea she had been recorded. She continued to move through the neighborhood, tearing down his signs late at night. She wore a hoodie and gloves, careful not to leave fingerprints, believing that she was clever and anonymous. At the same time, she believed she was helping the community by removing the signs of someone she didn't trust. In her mind, she was taking action for the greater good. One morning, the man received a call from the local police. They had reviewed the footage and were impressed with the clarity of the evidence. They explained that they now had enough to take action against her for vandalism, but they wanted him to stay calm and let the law handle it. The man felt a mix of relief and nervousness. He hadn't wanted the situation to escalate, but he now realized that the law would protect both his campaign and the town. The police advised him to continue documenting any incidents, but to avoid confronting the woman directly. They warned that confrontation could provoke unpredictable behavior, and it was better to let the evidence speak for itself. He agreed, focusing on strengthening his campaign while quietly preparing for the next step in the process. Days later, he noticed something unexpected. The woman had made a mistake. In her attempts to take matters into her own hands, she had signed a document related to public property. She had believed it was a harmless note, something that allowed her to remove the signs officially, but in reality, she had inadvertently admitted that she had no authority to take the signs down. It was an ironic twist. The very action she thought would protect her now put her at risk. He shared this discovery with the police, who were already reviewing her activities. They confirmed that this slip was significant. Not only did the footage clearly show her vandalism, but she had also provided a signed statement acknowledging she acted without permission. The combination of evidence made her case clear and strong. The man felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. He didn't want to see anyone in trouble, but he knew that rules existed for a reason. People who took matters into their own hands without following the law often ended up causing more harm than good. He hoped that once this situation was resolved, the woman would understand the consequences of her actions. In the meantime, he continued his campaign. Every day he drove through neighborhoods, smiling and greeting people, talking about his plans and listening to their concerns. He wanted to show the community that his focus was on progress, not revenge. The positive attention he received gave him renewed energy and reinforced his belief in patience and integrity. The woman, unaware of the growing legal net around her, continued her nightly missions. She moved quickly, stealthily, confident in her anonymity. She had no idea that each action was being recorded and documented. Her overconfidence blinded her to the consequences that were slowly closing in. One evening, as she was removing a sign near the local grocery store, she muttered to herself about how stupid the campaign signs were and how she was protecting the town. She didn't notice that a small camera mounted on a nearby lamppost had captured her every move. The footage was clear and undeniable, showing her approach, the removal of the sign, and the way she carried it away. The man received updates from the police as they reviewed the growing collection of evidence. They explained that the signed slip she had made, combined with the video, left little doubt about her actions. The police planned to confront her in a way that would avoid public spectacle. They wanted to handle it professionally and quietly, to prevent unnecessary conflict in the town. He felt a sense of calm as he listened. The situation was no longer just about vandalized signs. It had become a lesson in law and accountability. He realized that sometimes when people act impulsively without thinking of consequences, they create their own problems. In a strange way, he felt empathy for her, even though her actions had caused him stress. While waiting for the authorities to act, he focused on strengthening his campaign. He held small meetings in local community centers, spoke with groups of residents about the town's future, and listened to their concerns. People were drawn to his sincerity, and his message of integrity and practical solutions began to resonate widely. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable, though. Some residents whispered about the conflict, wondering if the woman would face consequences. Others sympathized with her, believing she was standing up for her views. The man tried not to get distracted by opinions. He knew that staying focused on his goals was the best way to demonstrate leadership. Meanwhile, the woman's nightly efforts continued, each time unwittingly strengthening the case against her. She did not realize that the combination of her overconfidence, the recorded footage, and the signed slip had created a nearly perfect legal record of her actions. Every step she took, every sign she tore down, brought her closer to facing consequences. At home, the man reviewed the footage again. Watching the woman in action was frustrating, but it also confirmed that justice could be served without confrontation. He knew that taking matters into his own hands could make things worse, so he remained patient, letting the law handle the situation. As the days passed, he noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood. People began taking extra care to look out for the signs. Some even volunteered to help him secure them. It was a small gesture, but it reflected growing support for his campaign and recognition of his dedication. He felt grateful for the community's quiet assistance, realizing that even small acts of solidarity mattered. He also began reflecting on the larger lesson of the situation. The woman's impulsive behavior had created chaos, yet the situation could have been avoided if she had acted differently. He realized that leadership wasn't just about policy. It was about patience, understanding, and following rules that protect everyone. His approach, grounded in calm reasoning, was becoming a practical example of the values he wanted to promote in the town. One evening, he received a call from the police. They informed him that they were preparing to speak with the woman and present the evidence. The tone of the officer was professional but firm, emphasizing that the law would handle the situation fairly. The man felt a mix of relief and anticipation. Finally, the moment when the situation might be resolved was approaching. He thought about how this conflict had affected the campaign. Initially, the vandalism had been frustrating, even upsetting, but over time, it had also strengthened his resolve. It had taught him patience, careful planning, and the importance of following legal procedures. It had also shown the community that dedication and integrity mattered more than impulsive action or intimidation. The woman, still unaware of what was coming, continued her routine. She believed she was clever, acting without anyone noticing. She had no idea that the law had already documented her actions, that the combination of video footage and the signed slip made her situation nearly impossible to defend. Her confidence, once a source of strength, was now ironically what would lead to her downfall. The man continued to prepare for the coming days. He made sure his signs were secure, maintained contact with the police, and focused on connecting with residents. His patience and calm demeanor were starting to pay off. People began seeing him not just as a candidate, but as someone who could handle challenges with dignity and intelligence. At the same time, he kept thinking about the human side of the story. He wondered what had driven the woman to act this way. Was it fear, mistrust, a misunderstanding of what was right? He hoped that once the situation was resolved, there might be an opportunity for her to reflect and learn from her mistakes. He didn't want anyone to be harmed unnecessarily, but he also recognized that actions have consequences. As the evening settled in, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. The days had been stressful, but he had handled the situation without losing his focus. He had documented evidence, worked with authorities, and maintained his campaign efforts. Most importantly, he had stayed calm even when provoked. He reminded himself that this was only the beginning. The woman's actions had created a clear path for accountability, and soon the town would see the consequences of impulsive behavior. In the meantime, he would continue to focus on the campaign, on listening to residents, and on building a positive future for the community. The signs, standing taller now and reinforced more carefully, became symbols of perseverance. Each one represented more than just a campaign message. They were evidence that integrity, patience, and careful planning could overcome obstacles. The man felt a quiet pride as he drove through The following week arrived with a mixture of anticipation and quiet tension. The man continued his routine, checking on his signs early each morning. Each sign that stood tall was a small victory. a reminder that patience and preparation paid off. At the same time, he couldn't help but think about the woman and how close she was to facing the consequences of her actions. Her overconfidence had been her undoing, and he knew that soon the town would see the full truth. He spent his mornings driving through the neighborhoods, greeting residents, and listening to their concerns. Children waved from the sidewalks and older residents nodded in acknowledgement. These moments reminded him why he had started this campaign in the first place. It wasn't just about holding a council seat. It was about making a real difference for the people who live there. Every conversation strengthened his resolve to continue, even in the face of obstacles. The woman, still unaware of the mounting evidence against her, went about her nightly routine with the same determination she had shown from the beginning. She moved quickly, avoiding well-lit streets and keeping her movements calculated. In her mind, she was protecting the town from someone she didn't trust, unaware that each act of vandalism was being documented and would soon have serious consequences. Late one evening, the man received a call from the police. Their voices were calm but firm, explaining that they were ready to confront her. They had reviewed the footage multiple times and confirmed that her signed slip of authorization was a clear admission of wrongdoing. The police emphasized that they wanted to handle the situation quietly, without drawing unnecessary attention from neighbors or creating conflict in the community. The man felt a mixture of relief and nervousness. Relief, because he knew that the law was on his side, and that the situation would finally reach resolution. Nervousness, because he still worried about how the confrontation would unfold. He didn't want anyone to be hurt, and he hoped the process would be fair and respectful. In the meantime, he focused on maintaining his campaign momentum. He organized small gatherings in local community centers, speaking directly to residents about his plans. People were drawn to his sincerity, and the story of the vandalized signs had spread quietly through the town. Many admired his patience and ability to handle the situation without anger or retaliation. It became clear that his approach was influencing public perception, reinforcing the message that calm, responsible leadership mattered more than impulsive actions. The woman, meanwhile, continued to take down signs. One night she approached a sign near a corner store, tugging at the stake with force. She muttered to herself about how ridiculous the campaign had become, believing she was acting in the town's best interest. She had no idea that her actions were being recorded and that each movement, each deliberate pull was building a strong case against her. Her confidence was blinding, and that overconfidence would soon become the turning point. The man at home that evening reviewed the latest footage. Watching the woman move quietly through the streets, unaware of the evidence against her, was frustrating but also strangely satisfying. The law had a way of balancing things out, and he felt reassured that justice could be served without confrontation or retaliation. He reminded himself that his patience and integrity were stronger than anger, and that the outcome would demonstrate the importance of following rules and respecting others' property. The next day, he spoke with a few neighbors about recent events, careful not to spread rumors or exaggerate. People were curious but cautious. The man emphasized the importance of fairness, focusing on the campaign and the positive changes he hoped to bring. Many residents began volunteering to help him with community events, and even offered to keep an eye on the signs. These small acts of support reinforced his belief in community spirit and the importance of leading by example. The police scheduled a time to speak with the woman directly. They explained that the approach would be calm and professional, designed to avoid any public spectacle. The man felt a sense of anticipation. Soon the woman would confront the consequences of her actions, and the town would see that law and order could prevail over impulsive, reckless behavior. As the evening of the scheduled meeting approached, the man drove through the neighborhood, checking his signs one last time for the day. Each sign was secure, each stake firmly in the ground. He felt a quiet pride, knowing that the effort he had put into maintaining the campaign was not just about visibility, but about demonstrating commitment and responsibility. These signs had become symbols, not just of his campaign, but of his approach to leadership, patient, deliberate, and principled. The woman, unaware of the meeting that awaited her, continued her nightly patrols. She approached a sign near the edge of the park, tugging it from the ground with practiced efficiency. In her mind, she was righting a perceived wrong. She didn't see the irony in her actions. The very steps she took to assert control were the same steps that would soon lead to her downfall. When the police finally arrived at her home, they approached calmly and professionally. They presented the evidence. Clear video footage showing her removing the signs combined with the signed slip that confirmed she had no authority to do so. At first she tried to deny it, insisting that she was acting in the town's interest. But as the police laid out the facts, her confidence began to waver. She realized that there was no way to escape the consequences of her actions. The man heard about the confrontation the next day. He felt a mix of relief and astonishment. He had never imagined that the situation would resolve so clearly and decisively. The woman's own actions had created the evidence that led to her downfall, and the town would soon see that impulsive behavior carried real consequences. With the immediate threat removed, the man focused on his campaign more than ever. He continued attending meetings, listening to residents, and sharing his vision for the town. People began to notice not just his platform, but the way he handled challenges. His patience, integrity, and commitment became part of his message, reinforcing the idea that leadership was about more than words. It was about actions. The community also began to reflect on the situation. Conversations among neighbors turned from gossip to thoughtful discussions about responsibility, respect, and civic duty. People realized that taking the law into one's own hands, even with good intentions, could create serious problems. The man's approach had shown that patience and lawful action were far more effective than impulsive measures. In the days that followed, the town seemed to settle into a quieter rhythm. The signs remained intact, community events were well attended, and the campaign continued to gain momentum. The man felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing that he had navigated the challenges without compromising his principles. He had turned a potentially destructive situation into an opportunity to demonstrate leadership, resilience, and integrity. Meanwhile, the woman began to process what had happened. Facing the consequences of her actions was humbling. She realized that her impulsive decisions had caused unnecessary stress for herself and others. In her quiet moments, she reflected on how she could have approached disagreements differently, through conversation, understanding, and lawful action rather than destruction. The man, despite everything, felt empathy for her. He knew that people make mistakes, and he hoped that she would learn from this experience. The situation had been frustrating and stressful, but it had also taught him important lessons about patience, fairness, and the power of following the law. He wanted the woman and the community to see that mistakes could be opportunities for growth, not just punishment. As Election Day approached, the man continued his efforts with renewed energy. He focused on connecting with voters, explaining his plans, and listening to their concerns. The story of the vandalized signs and the woman's actions had quietly spread through the town, highlighting his calm and principled approach. People admired his ability to handle conflict without resorting to anger or retaliation. The signs, now reinforced and carefully placed, stood as reminders of the challenges he had faced. Each one symbolized more than just a campaign message. It was a testament to perseverance, integrity, and the importance of following rules. Residents began to see the difference between impulsive behavior and thoughtful, lawful action. Even children in the neighborhood noticed. They would point to the signs and ask questions about what had happened. The man used these moments to explain the importance of honesty, respect, and patience. He wanted the next generation to understand that true leadership wasn't about reacting in anger. It was about making thoughtful choices, even when provoked. The woman, after the confrontation, faced a period of reflection. She realized that her actions, while intended to assert control, had ultimately caused more harm than good. She began to understand that respecting others' property and following the law were essential components of a functioning community. The experience humbled her, and she began to consider how she could approach disagreements more constructively in the future. Through all of this, the man remained focused on the bigger picture. He knew that his campaign was about more than winning an election. It was about setting an example for the town. His calm, patient, and lawful approach had already influenced the community. The days after the confrontation felt almost surreal to the man. The immediate threat of his signs being torn down was gone, and he could finally focus entirely on his campaign. The woman had been confronted by the authorities, And although the situation was far from pleasant, he felt a sense of calm, knowing that justice was being handled properly. Still, he knew that the town had been watching closely, and how he conducted himself now would influence people's perceptions even more. He spent his mornings visiting different neighborhoods, walking through streets, shaking hands, and talking to residents. People were curious about the events that had unfolded, but they also noticed how composed he remained. He never spoke negatively about the woman. Instead, he emphasized the importance of fairness, integrity, and following the law. Residents began to see that he wasn't just campaigning for a seat on the council, he was setting an example of how to handle challenges responsibly. Small groups of neighbors approached him as he walked through the town. Some expressed surprise at the way the situation had been handled, saying that most people would have reacted with anger or retaliation. He smiled and told them that getting upset rarely solved problems. He explained that patience, careful observation, and working within the rules could prevent misunderstandings and conflict. Slowly, people began to trust him not just as a candidate, but as someone who could lead the community wisely. Meanwhile, the woman spent her days reflecting on what had happened. The confrontation with the police had been humbling. She realized that in trying to assert control, she had broken the law and caused unnecessary trouble for herself and for the man. She began to see the situation from his perspective, understanding that his patience and persistence had created the conditions for justice without unnecessary escalation. She started to consider how she might approach disagreements differently in the future, recognizing that impulsive actions often have consequences far beyond what one expects. The man, aware of her reflection, did not feel anger. He felt empathy. He knew that people make mistakes, and he hoped that she could learn from this experience. He wanted the town to understand that mistakes did not have to define someone, but they were opportunities to grow and make better choices moving forward. This approach, he realized, would strengthen his message as a candidate. Leadership was about integrity, responsibility, and encouraging others to do the right thing. In the community, people began talking more about accountability. The story of the signs and the woman's actions became a lesson in civic responsibility. Neighbors discussed how taking matters into one's own hands could backfire, and how patience and lawful behavior often led to better outcomes. Even those who had initially supported the woman began to understand the importance of following the rules and respecting others' property. The man's campaign continued to gain momentum. He held small town hall meetings, listened to concerns, and explained practical solutions for problems that had long been ignored. Residents appreciated his honesty and approachability. They were drawn to his message, not just because of the policy proposals, but because of the way he had handled the challenges that had arisen. His story of patience and integrity had become part of the campaign itself, showing the community the kind of leader he would be. At home, the man reflected on the lessons he had learned from the experience. He realized that leadership wasn't about dominating others or reacting in anger. It was about understanding people, staying calm in difficult situations, and making decisions that were fair and responsible. The ordeal with the signs and the woman had been stressful, but it had also been an important part of his personal growth. He also thought about the symbolism of the signs themselves. They had started as simple markers for his campaign, but they had become more than that. Each sign represented resilience, perseverance, and a commitment to doing the right thing, even when challenged. Seeing them stand tall in the neighborhoods reminded him and the community that integrity mattered, and that actions taken carefully and responsibly could overcome obstacles. The woman, after facing the consequences, began to engage with the community differently. She attended local meetings and started listening to discussions rather than interrupting with impulsive actions. It was a slow process, but she began to understand that participating in the community meant respecting others' voices and following the rules. The experience had humbled her, but it had also opened a door for growth and reflection. Meanwhile, the man continued to build connections with voters. He visited local businesses, spoke with shop owners, and asked about the challenges they faced. He offered practical solutions, promising support and assistance where it was needed. Residents were impressed by his dedication and attention to detail. The story of the signs, the confrontation, and the woman's reflection had given the town a new perspective on leadership. They saw that calm, lawful action often had a greater impact than aggressive behavior. The atmosphere in the town slowly shifted. People began to focus less on conflict and more on community improvement. Neighbors started organizing cleanups, helping with local events and supporting one another in small ways. The man's example had shown that one person's responsible behavior could influence the entire community. Leadership wasn't about control. It was about setting a standard for others to follow. Even the children noticed the change. They asked questions about the signs and the story behind them. The man used these moments to teach lessons about honesty, patience, and responsibility. He wanted the younger generation to see that true leadership meant handling challenges with integrity and showing respect to others, even in difficult situations. These lessons, he hoped, would carry forward long after the campaign was over. As election day approached, the man focused on preparation and outreach. He attended community meetings, visited neighborhoods, and ensured that residents were aware of his platform. The story of the signs and the woman's actions continued to circulate quietly, illustrating the importance of patience and lawful conduct. It was clear that his approach had gained him respect and credibility throughout the town. The woman, reflecting on her actions, began to reach out to neighbors and the community in small ways. She apologized privately to some residents for her impulsive behavior and made efforts to participate constructively. Though her mistakes were clear, she had started to understand the importance of responsible action and respecting others' efforts. Her transformation, though gradual, demonstrated that people could learn and grow when given the opportunity. The man felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that the situation had been resolved without escalation. The town had witnessed how calm, thoughtful action could overcome conflict. The signs had remained intact, his campaign had continued without further interference, and the woman had begun to reflect on her choices. It was a rare example of conflict resolving itself through patience, observation, and lawfulness. In the days leading up to the election, the man remained focused. He knew that the outcome would depend not just on his campaign proposals, but on the trust and respect he had earned from the community. The story of the signs and how he had handled the situation had become an integral part of that trust. People respected his ability to maintain composure, act responsibly, and lead by example. He also continued to emphasize community involvement. He encouraged neighbors to participate in local meetings, volunteer for events, and contribute to positive change. He wanted to create a culture of responsibility, where people understood that actions have consequences, and that working together respectfully could lead to meaningful improvement. The story of the signs had become a teaching moment, not just a campaign anecdote. The atmosphere in the town was changing. People were more engaged, more thoughtful, and more willing to listen. The conflict with the woman had sparked conversations about fairness, accountability, and respect for others' efforts. Residents began to recognize the value of leadership that prioritized integrity over aggression. The man's calm, principled approach had shown them a different way to address challenges. Even the woman's neighbors noticed her transformation. They saw her attending meetings, listening attentively, and attempting to participate constructively. Though she had made mistakes, she was beginning to understand the importance of lawful, responsible action. The town had learned that consequences, when handled fairly and calmly, could lead to reflection and growth. The man continued his routine, checking his signs each morning and maintaining his campaign presence. He remained approachable, listening to residents, answering questions, and discussing practical solutions. The story of the signs and the woman's actions had quietly influenced the town's perception, reinforcing the idea that integrity, patience, and responsibility were the hallmarks of true leadership. At home, he reflected on the journey so far. The challenges he had faced, though stressful, had strengthened his resolve and clarified his understanding of leadership. He realized that setbacks and conflicts could be opportunities to demonstrate character and inspire others. The ordeal with the signs had been more than just a nuisance. It had been a chance to show the community the value of calm, principled action. The signs themselves remained a symbol. Each one, carefully reinforced and standing tall, represented